Yeah, what's up, guys? My name is Jason Chu. I'm a hip hop artist in LA, and this is my life story. Yeah, so I grew up in this little hometown, Hockessin, Delaware. Very suburban, East Coast. So it was very white. It was diversity. Like there were black people in my neighborhood, a couple Asian families, but by and large, and I would say not just by numbers, but culturally, it was very white, very European. And then so to come out to SoCal, which is population dominant population is Latinos, is a Hispanic population, and it's very interesting being in an area where there's I don't even know the demographics, but it feels like culturally there's more of an assumption of like not everybody's born into sort of white American dominant culture, which is very very interesting to me. Man, I love hip hop, man. Like really, cause I was just this Chinese kid growing up in Delaware. Like very much. And I'm small. Like I could never hoop. I could never like play football the same way other kids did. So I was always, I mean, and I didn't necessarily feel bad about that, but very often, like I was very much into academics. I was very much into studying and into my math and science and all that. But then music was actually the first thing that I found where it balanced both my personal skills, the skill set that I could cultivate on my own. It's not like a basketball where you got to be out on the court and you got to be competing in that way. It was skills that I could cultivate at home and on my own, but then balance with having like this public voice. Like that was really the first time I think when I got into music, when I got into hip hop, and I remember when I had my talent show, my junior year of high school. That was the first time that I had like a public voice, as opposed to just studying hard and doing well on a test, or going off and competing in some science thing. This was the first time that I was in front of my community, my high school, and demonstrating something that really came from my heart. So it really grabbed me at the beginning, just because hip hop is always a voice for people who want to tell their stories. It's a voice for people whose stories might not pop up on the mainstream radar, and that really motivated me. That really inspired me, and ultimately, that served as a venue for me. So I'm very thankful for hip hop.
And I hope that it works out. Every verse I rehearse, then I blurt out. Wrote this all night till my eyes blurred out. Crossed on my MacBook, I'm taking them to church now. This is more than what it seems. High school graduation phototype scene. March across the stage playing vitamin C. Now I'm on another level like the plumber chasing Peach. We make this look easy to do. You ain't heard me, this is not Luigi to do. I'm the shorter brother, you can pick me out of any two. Never Mario 2, you'll never catch me in a suit. Hidden character hoodie, rocking with the buzz like Woody. Pause. Got a couple X's, cars. I'm flipping CDs like Pogs. Never Ramadan when my rhyme is on and it's regular on schedule like a metronome. Ha! 2015, Rare's on deck. How we get it like a magic car set. Cool. Can we play that one back?
It's funny because I feel like it's sort of the exact same thing as hip hop actually. Comics is all about marginalized voices. Comics never works well when it's funny because even like Superman, right, who's the most mainstream of any comic book hero ever, even he has this persona of being an outsider, right? He's the small town kid in a big city. And the thing I love about comic books is because comic books, they don't, they never tell you this story of like, oh, here's somebody who's powerful and he's just powerful and that's all it is. Like that's just the story. Yeah. Comics, it's always this story of like every comic book, like Superman's an immigrant, like Wonder Woman's an immigrant, like all the X-Men are marginalized people in their societies, like the first in the 70s, Len Cockrum, the all new X-Men team, like the first stories of Colossus and Nightcrawler and Storm was stories of Professor X going around and finding all these kids, these weird people on the fringes of their societies and gathering them up and putting them together, bringing them together to create something. So I feel like for me, comics was always a venue. It was the same story as hip hop when you think about it, which is why I think that's why hip hop loves comic books. You got, it's funny, you got all of these black inner city kids in the 70s and 80s growing up on these stories being told by, Jewish comic creators who were born in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I think that there is that unifying tension of, for a lot of these people, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Siegel and Schuster, who created Superman, them facing anti-Semitism really resonated. And I don't even think it was necessarily conscious, but the stories they were telling because of what it was like to grow up as a young Jewish man in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The stories they were telling resonated with young black men in the 70s and 80s. And then for me, as a Chinese kid growing up in the 90s and 2000s in Delaware, it hit that same chord with me. I think where the story of Marvel starts with is that I flew my producer Jung, this Korean American kid in Sacramento. We flew him down last summer to do some sessions. And one of the beats that he created during those sessions became Marvel's, the song. And so I was listening to it, and it just felt like this very inspirational, very beautiful song. And I thought, what is there in my life? What passion or hope or emotion is there in my life that fits with what this song seems to be saying? And the concept of heroes came up. And then I realized, I like we were saying, as a kid who grew up reading comic books, comics were serious to me. It wasn't something, it was fun, but it was fun because I really took it to heart. And I feel like a lot of the media that I see, a lot of the content I see created around comics, especially with regards to music, and it takes this thing that's very serious and very real and really brought people into an emotional place. But it's like we're afraid of our emotions, or we're afraid of sincerity. And so it makes it into this ironic sort of kitsch. And when I was thinking about heroes and thinking about the concept of like a Marvel, I realized that there's not a lot of people who've written and created work. There's some, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to write a song that treated this childhood love with the sincerity and the sort of genuine heart that was real to it. Instead of creating a parody song, or, instead of writing like a funny rap about like, oh, I'm Wolverine and now I'm going to rap Battle Magneto. Like, that's cute and that's funny. But to me, honestly, we laugh at things or we make jokes out of things because we're afraid to take them seriously. We're afraid to be vulnerable. And so I wanted to create something that really spoke from that childlike heart.
How do I do that? How do I fly when I'm so far down? How would I do that? Make those sounds boom, bang, pow. How do I do that? How do I fly when I'm so far down? How would I do that? Make a sound loud as a cloud.
Truth and justice were supposed to be a lifeline, a spider web to break the fall out of my right mind. But my villains don't look like Lex Luthor, my uncle's heart attack, my science teacher's tumor. Bruce Wayne fought Joker to bring his city hope, but I grew up in a city that laughed at racist jokes. Clark Kent never lost Lois Lane, but when I told Sarah I loved her, she broke my heart in the 10th grade.
Mos Def said it best. Mos Def has this awesome intro to his classic, I think it was in 1999, Black on Both Sides. He says people speak about hip-hop like hip-hop is a giant living in the woods. Like it's, this thing out there with its own will. Like hip-hop is not a thing. Hip-hop is us. Hip-hop is the people. So if the people love drugs, hip-hop will be about drugs. If people love fucking, hip-hop will be about fucking. Like if hip-hop loves celibacy, if we as a people say, hey, what we want is somebody who's politically active, or we want somebody who's faithful to their spouse, that's what hip-hop's gonna be. And I feel like people love pointing fingers, right? People love pointing fingers at LA or at Hollywood or at the industry. Like, trust me, if people chose to vote with their dollars and say, hey, what we want is, you know, jazz. Def Jam's gonna be a jazz label, you know? And so I feel like for me, I can't speak on hip hop as a whole. I can just speak on what it is for me. You know, where for me, hip hop is just honesty, is what it is. Like hip hop, art, like art in general, just has to be honesty, you know? And so for me, hip hop means speaking from the heart, and then being okay with where your heart's at. Or if what you speak out, you realize that you don't like what you see there, then being that change in yourself, right? Because hip hop can't change me. Like hip hop can't make my life better. That's something I have to do. That's something my community has to do. That's something that I need to have the self-awareness to make those changes. And then once I've done that, then the art I'm creating will naturally change. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like as an Asian American artist, like I just always know in hip hop, you know, I'm a guest. Mm-hmm. Like I'm very thankful. I'm very fortunate that certain people have opened doors for me. Certain people have trained me and taught me and given me a position or a role to play. But yeah, you know, hip hop came from, very specifically, you know, hip hop came from like maybe one or two boroughs of New York City. And so I feel like as somebody who like I've been mentored by a lot of artists. You know, I've looked up to a lot of people, whether they know me or not. Like I've received their instruction, going all the way back to, you know, like Rakim, KRS-One, Chuck D, all the way up to now, you know, like people that I know personally. Like there's other Asian American artists, dudes like MC Jin, dudes like the spoken word artist Bosia, guys like that who've been laying it down. And when I talk to dudes like that, one thing that I'm always blown away by is their humility and their understanding that, you know, we are harvesting fruits from a culture that our ancestors didn't necessarily pay into it. You know, so if we're allowed into the garden, it's because there's gatekeepers who've let us come in and have shown us love. Yeah, I'm very fortunate that, you know, wherever I go, I have gotten love. Even when I was very bad at music, even when I was not, you know, even 2-3 years ago, when I moved here and my music was just not good sounding, there were a lot of people who saw the heart behind it, saw the vision behind it, and said, you know what, you're not where you're gonna be, you're not where you should be, but we believe in why you're doing it. And thanks to those people, you know, a lot, like that's my engineer, you know, my engineer and music director, this dude, Chris Changchien, he saw where I was at, he saw what I was doing, and he said, hey, you know, let's do this together. Yeah, so I think the reception's been good. Honestly, it's good in a different way than like so for example in the black community, you know, you get a new young black hip hop artist who's good at music, who's saying some interesting things, and I think there's more infrastructure for them, right? There's not really infrastructure for a Chinese American rapper who's sort of preaching Pan-Asian American values to there's no obvious track, you know, in the same way that like, you know, if you're in the black community and Drake co-signs you, and then, you know, Def Jam helps, you know, build your career, there's more of an obvious path there. For me, I'm very thankful. I've gotten a lot of love, you know, out of town, in town, but it's just that there's less of a precedence, you know, like literally, if you know, if you're a black hip hop artist, there's literally thousands or tens of thousands of people who are working to create and to promote and to advance black hip hop artists. If you're a young Asian American hip hop artist, especially one who's not pop, because a lot of hip hop in the Asian community is actually pop, you know, like the sort of artists that will pop off in Hong Kong or Taiwan or Korea. Often what they're doing is actually a hip hop flavored pop. But in terms of, you know, young indie hip hop artists doing it in the States, there might only be a few dozen people who are actively thinking, okay, how do we A&R, how do we brand, how do we promote, how do we train these artists to really reach their potential. So it's exciting though. Like the homies and I think there's a lot of really dope young Asian American artists out right now. And everybody's at this sort of same level of saying, okay, how do we literally build out this infrastructure in our generation? When these kids who are younger and they're trying to rap, when they're coming up in 10 years, how do we create something so that, 10 years from now, there's Asian American student associations and colleges all across the nation who are like, yeah, we were looking for that next artist. And so I think a lot of the excitement for me and my peers in this generation is realizing that we can create something that doesn't exist, as opposed to doing a better version of it, or as opposed to doing more or a newer form of it. We're literally creating something in our communities that doesn't exist, and that's exciting. Man, I'm just tired of seeing all of the best and brightest young Asian American minds go into consulting in med school. Like, I'm tired of it. Like, I'm tired. Like, you can't, I went to Yale. I went to an Ivy League school. You can't tell me that most of my peers at Yale, like literally the majority of my peers, was meant to wind up in those two fields. With all the different fields that's out there, sociology, public policy, entertainment, film, whatever. You can't tell me that I think literally a majority of my Asian American peers that I know did consulting or went to med school. And I think it's because people don't believe there's options. Or it's because parents don't believe there's options. Or it's because kids just aren't exposed to the fact that, hey, and that's one thing I love about SoCal. Because in SoCal, young Asian American kids grow up thinking, hey, I could be a dancer. Or, hey, my friend's older sister moved to Korea and became a singer there. Or became a musician there. Like, that's amazing to me. And I think there should be more young Asian American kids who see role models who really went into art, who really went into developing their stories. And that's because Asian America needs it, right? Because otherwise, if we don't talk about ourselves, if we don't talk about our experiences, future generations just have no idea what went on. Every generation's gonna have to rediscover it for themselves, right? Every generation's gonna think they're the first ones to go through this identity conflict or to go through this generational struggle with their parents. And we need to do it for the kids, because the kids need to know that, like, hey, people come before you, people have struggled like you are, and they found ways to live through it. They found ways to grow through it. So that's for our community. And then just for the American community at large, like, America needs to know we have things to offer. Like the Asian community has certain outlooks on life, has certain way, white people love yoga. Like, white people love yoga. And that's an Asian thing, like white people love Buddhism and meditation. Like, that's an Asian thing. So it's not, Asian culture benefits the world in the same way that, like, black culture, like, my life is way better having listened to Tupac. Like, if I didn't know who Tupac was, my life would be way less tight. If I didn't know who, Moses was, my life would be way less tight, because Jewish people have contributed a lot to the world. Black people, Africans, African Americans have contributed a lot to the world. White people contribute a lot to the world. If I didn't know about Marie Curie or Abraham Lincoln, my life would be less tight. So if all of, every culture adds something to the world. And for Asians, we can't just think like, oh, we need to tell Asian American stories so our community gets up. We need to tell Asian American stories because there's Asian American stories that white people can be inspired by. There's Asian American stories that black people can get inspired by. There's all kinds of people in our community who struggled, who've worked through things, who've had to deal with oppression, who've had to deal with internalized issues, to where if we can share the fruits of that struggle, other communities can be blessed by it. But if we just hide behind like, oh, it's cool, we don't really need to tell those stories, then it's not just that we're suffering. It's that there could be a contribution that we could put on the table that we're just leaving off because we're shy.